Albert Einstein scribbled on a scrap of paper and supposedly handed to a hotel porter the following: a calm and modest life brings more happiness than the pursuit of success combined with constant restlessness. That sold at auction for $1.56 million in 2017. So I think it has some value, something to think about. That's a little bit more the way that I'm trying to live my life these days. Hi, everybody. I'm Victoria Moran, host of the Main Street Vegan podcast. Wonderful to have everyone with us today. After the break, we're going to be talking with Jennifer Stojkovic of the Vegan Women's Summit. Oh my gosh, the things that are happening in vegan business, and so many women and minorities and amazing men and everybody else is part of that. So exciting. And right now, we're going to get things going faster by doing something that we've always been told couldn't be done, and that is change other people. My first guest is Howard Jacobson. You know Dr. Jacobson. He has been writing books with other people you know for a very long time. It's made himself an actual best-selling author, as well as an executive coach and health coach. He wrote Sick to Fit with Josh LaJaunie, Whole with Dr. T. Colin Campbell, and Proteinaholic with Dr. Garth Davis. He hosts the Plant Yourself podcast and trains health coaches at the WellStart Coaching Academy. His latest book is You Can Change Other People. Welcome, Howard.
Thank you, Victoria. It's so great to be here.
It's wonderful to be with you. I always love talking with you, and I always love reading your work. You can really write. And it's so cool that nowadays everybody with something to say can get it out there in written form. But when I read something by somebody who's gifted with words, it's extra special. And you are one of those. So thanks for sharing that gift.
Well, it's ironic that a compliment like that leaves me tongue-tied then.
Well, that works. So you say we can change other people. So let's see. You are going against most psychologists, certainly Al-Anon, and a lot of what we have learned just in life experience. We've tried to change other people and it's never really worked. So how come you're saying the exact opposite?
Yeah, well, first of all, when people tell us that, they're trying to change us, right? If someone says to you, you can't change other people, they're trying to get you to stop doing something. So they don't believe it themselves. Psychologists are in the business of changing other people, right? So the truth is people change all the time. And, big changes, little changes. And the reason we think we can't change other people is because we go about it the wrong way. We do and say things that actually bring about resistance rather than change. So what we want to do is understand. So, it's a provocative title. And I understand people might think it means I'm going to bend someone else to my will. And that's not what we mean at all. What I mean is to help other people live in accordance with their own values and priorities and goals. And the way I think about change is it's a discontinuity from the past. So if I can have a conversation with you, and as a result of that conversation, you start doing something even a little bit differently than you had done and would have done without that conversation, in my book, I've changed you. And I think this fear of changing other people, if somehow it's a step too far, or it's something we're not allowed to do, or it's not respectful, means that we give up a lot of our power to do good in the world. Because, I don't know about you, but I've changed people for the worse my whole life, accidentally or out of spite or rage or something. We can do things to make people feel very bad and to get them to stop doing things they would otherwise do. So I'm saying there is a process, a reliable, repeatable process. And I know it because I've used it for decades as a coach that can get people to make changes that they want to make or realize that are in their best interests.
That is really interesting because listening to you, I see that the kind of changing people that doesn't work is okay, I really don't like that you do ABC and I want you to do this, this, and this. But on the other hand, just living our lives in an aspirational kind of way where other people think, well, maybe I'll pick up some of that non-dairy milk next time I'm at the store. Just kind of subtly, it's almost as if, I hate to use the word contagion after what we've all been through the past few years, but there really does seem to be something about if you're behaving in a way that is attractive to somebody else, they might want to do it too. Is that some of what you're getting at?
It's certainly true that being a role model is a very powerful way to help people see new ways to do things. But I think the statement, you can't change other people, is almost always followed by, you can only change yourself. So then we have everybody's favorite email signature line, Gandhi's quote, "You be the change you want to see in the world." And that's absolutely true. And there are ways that you can help people change without having to be a role model. So if only the only thing I can do is be a role model, then people aren't necessarily going to see me in situations that it would be relevant. And I might want to help someone change in a way that I don't. I might want, somebody else wants to be more assertive in a meeting, and I can help them with that, even if I don't necessarily have to go out of my way to display that behavior in front of them. So what we're really talking about is having conversations with people that can influence them to do new things. And regardless of, now, you do have to change yourself in order to do it. Because if you come at it and say, hey, you're wrong, this is how you should do it, that's what breeds resistance. What creates resistance is when someone comes at us as a critic. And a critic is someone who knows better than you. So it's not just nagging. It's not just saying, you're doing this wrong, you should eat this way instead of that way. A critic could also be someone offering you advice, unsolicited advice. Hey, it'd be much better if you had the Impossible Burger instead of the beef burger. And a critic could also be someone who tries to motivate you to do the right thing by sort of asking you questions. Wouldn't it be great? How would you feel if you lost all this weight? Can you imagine yourself playing with your grandkids in 30 years? Right? So anytime we come at a place of we know more than they do, we're going to trigger shame. And shame is the one thing that we hate to feel more than anything else. And that will lead to defensiveness and denial.
Wow, that is so interesting, because I had an experience just yesterday. My regular, wonderful, fabulous vegan veterinarians that I adore were not available. And so there's somebody new in the practice that we didn't know. And I took my dog there. And there were disagreements, but the presentation was like, how could I possibly know anything? I'm not a veterinarian. And that really rubbed me the wrong way. So I have an appointment now to go back and see my wonderful vet that I admire so much. And he might tell me some of the same stuff, but in a way that I would be much more open to hearing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So we think just, and this process is really not so much about changing people's minds and attitudes as much as changing their behaviors.
So where do we start? Let's start with probably what our listeners are most interested in. My husband, my brother, my best friend. I would just really love for them to look at the plant-based way of eating.
Sure. So the first thing is to recognize that you probably have created resistance already, right? So whatever we can own, we want to own. So the first step is, there's 4 steps in the process. And the first step is to shift yourself from critic to ally, so that the person feels like you have their best interests at heart and that you are going to be a support for them. So if you've been a critic for years, and before I understood this, and even to this day, it's so easy to be a critic that I have to do a lot of apologizing. So to say, just to be able to acknowledge. So the first thing I want to do before I approach them is get myself right. And so I'm going to think about my own negative emotions, frustration, anger, fear, right? Anything like what motivates me to keep trying to get, my spouse to change. And every time we have this conversation, I end up like in the grip of these emotions. How come you can't see it? I don't want to age alone. Can't you see what you're doing to the world? Aren't you scared about climate change and suffering of it? Right. So really acknowledge the emotions that I'm feeling. And here's a truism that underneath every strong emotion is a positive value. Like, if I don't care about you, then I don't care if you're not healthy. Right? It's only so get in touch with what do I have to believe, or what value do I have to hold in order for me to feel this bad? I care about animals. I care about suffering. I care about people. I love you. Right? So get in touch with your own positive underlying emotions that breed all the negative covering up emotions, and feel some compassion for yourself. Feel empathy for, yeah, this is important to me and I care. And maybe I haven't gone about it in the most elegant or the best ways, but I'm coming from a good place.
So what are we doing wrong now? Like, what are some of the things that we're getting wrong when we try to get other people to do things differently?
Yeah, well, so what do people need in order to change? They need ownership, right? Anyone who's ever told you to change, you resisted, because they're taking away your autonomy. Human beings have a huge need for autonomy, to be in charge of our lives. So if you work for someone and they suddenly come in and say, okay, we're going to be doing this thing differently, you're going to resist. And now they're going to have to, try to explain it to you, and they're going to have communication plans, and they're going to have seminars, and they're going to try to teach it. But as long as it's them telling you what to do, you're going to do the minimum you need to do to not get fired. Whereas opposed to someone comes to you and says, hey, we have this problem and we need some ideas about how to do things differently. If you are included in the conversation and you feel like you have some stamp of ownership, you will fight to bring that thing into fruition. So if you think about your spouse, brother, friend, whatever, you want to understand, like, what do they care about? Right. So when we think about, oh, this person is selfish, or they're lazy, or they're such a hypocrite, or whatever the negative label we're putting on them, let's do the same thing for them that we just did for ourselves, and say, like, what's the positive intent? What might the positive intent be behind their behavior? Wow. That person who eats so much meat, there's a positive intent. They want to feel good. They have strong memories of this food connected to their childhood, connected to their mother, connected to their culture, connected to a really happy time in their life. They may be really stressed out. And we know that very high dopamine, animal fat, salty, sugary foods make people feel good in the moment. So this person wants to feel good. They're doing these things because they want to feel good. And everybody wants to feel good. And that's a valid human need. So we can then approach them as an ally, saying, I care about you. I don't want to judge you. And we can begin to have a conversation together where you're not going to feel threatened.
So this brings up the whole issue of tolerance. And I think that's so hard in the vegan world, especially for ethical vegans, because if we tolerate people's using animal products and supporting that industry, then we're tolerating the suffering and the killing. And yet we don't want to be intolerant, but we don't want to tolerate that. So what do we do?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question. And it's not just about veganism, right? There are a lot of things that we would rather not tolerate in this world, from all sorts of injustices, from all sorts of suffering. And the question is, when I was about to get married, I got some advice from an older friend who said, you can either be married or you can be right, but you can't be both. Right. So like the question is, what do we want? What's the outcome that we want? If I want to help this person shift, first of all, recognize that it may never happen fully, but it may never, it may never happen as far as I want it to. And do I want it to have the best odds to move this person in the direction that I want to move them? Like, if I want to be effective as opposed to right, then I have to work with what is in the world. And that'll take a lot of self-compassion, right? Like when I ask vegans, like, what's the one word that defines how you want to live? It's always compassion, right? It's never skinny. It's always, I want, compassion. So, there's famously, ways in which we can be very uncompassionate with people who don't agree with us. And we see this all the time online. And there's ways in which we can be very uncompassionate with ourselves and say, well, if I can't get the whole world to go vegan, everybody in my orbit, then I'm not trying hard enough. Then there's something wrong with me. And I think, compassion can begin with myself, can extend to the people around me, because, basically people who are behaving in ways that are opposed to their values ultimately are confused. Right. So if I want someone to see that, so it's difficult because we're talking about almost two different things. One is I want to change their mind, and the other is I want to start changing their actions. And as a coach, I always want to change actions because it's less threatening, and people tend to change their beliefs once they have a set of actions that they're consistent with. So I think it's somewhere in the Bible, when God comes down with the 10 Commandments and says, okay, everybody listen up, the response from the Israelites at the foot of the mountain is Na'aseh v'nishma, which is we will do and we will listen. And so it's like, okay, so if I can get someone to do meatless Mondays, like they've already put a stake in the ground to now say, okay, I'm a person who cares about what I eat, who is trying to reduce animal products. That's a different person to have a conversation with than the person who you just want to go from McDonald's to vegan overnight.
That makes so much sense. And I think that's why so many people who go plant-based for their health then become open to the ethical and the environmental issues. It's very hard when you're supporting an industry, when you're consuming a product every day, to be confronted with this is an immoral act. And immediately, you want to combat that. But once you're no longer doing the act and somebody says, oh, this new way you're eating, it's not only great for your health, it's also saving all these lives and ending all the suffering, then people feel like, oh, I'm doing that. And it just opens that door wider and wider.
Yeah. There's a wonderful study that I don't have off the top of my head, but I could find it for you and your listeners. Of people were asked to come to a lab and were given instructions to do something that was kind of morally ambiguous, like not a great thing to do. And so then they would get a bunch of people to do it, and then they would have a shill. One of the, associate of the experimenter, who would then say, I'm not going to do that. That's immoral, that's not right. I refuse to do that. Or they would in another scenario, they would have the same thing, but the other person would go first and refuse. And then the study was actually asking the real participants what they thought of that person. And when that person said it first, before they had a chance to transgress, they admired that person. Like, I really like how that person stood up for their values. When they had done the wrong thing, they saw that person as a jerk.
Fascinating. That really is. So Howard, coach us. So I'm going to pretend to be somebody who doesn't know any other vegans. And I know this
Mm-hmm.
is true for a lot of people. I'm kind of in the other camp. When I meet somebody who's not a vegan, it's always a shock. It's kind of like somebody's still smoking cigarettes. That just
Yeah.
seems so archaic. But let's just say that my family or omnivorous, everybody I work with, everybody at my place of worship, all my longtime friends, everybody I know on Facebook. And all of a sudden, I'm eating in this different way and I'm getting tons of flack.
Mm-hmm.
Help me. What do I say?
Okay. So here's something that I discovered in writing the book with my writing partner, Peter Bregman, is that complaints, which I used to hate when people complained, I now see complaints as silver platter opportunities to have a conversation. So if someone's giving me flack and I feel like, all right, I'm new at this, maybe I'm not doing it right, or it's weird and I'm out of, connection with people that I've cared about for a long time. So let me work on that for myself and now see when I get somebody bites back at me to say, gee, I'm really curious. Tell me more. What are your concerns? Right? Because if I'm going to be defensive, then how am I ever going to ask them not to be defensive? Right.
Ooh.
So let me model the kind of openness that I want to see from them. Wow, what have you heard? Are you concerned for my health, or does it just seem weird? Tell me, I'm really curious because it's working for me. I love it.
Oh, that's brilliant. What a great start.
So, and then, they're like, do you love the way you're eating? And maybe if they're overweight, they might say something, right? But so like whenever anybody complains, like there's plenty of things to complain about if you're not eating a healthy diet, right? You could be on meds, you could be overweight, you could be sluggish, you could be irritable. Whenever anyone complains about anything like that, then you have a silver platter opportunity to get permission to talk to them. And you don't have to immediately bring it right to food, but we have a 3-step permission formula in the book, which is step 1 is empathize, right? Instead of like someone says, oh, my back's really hurting, I've gained 20 pounds during the pandemic. You don't jump in with, hey, I've got an eating plan for you, right? You say, oh man, that sounds horrible. I'm so sorry to hear that. Step 2 is to express confidence in them. Whatever is true about their capabilities that you see, you're very resourceful. You've solved problems like this in the past, or like, I know, I've seen you recover from injuries and things like that, something that expresses confidence. And then step 3 is to ask permission. Would you like to think about it together? Right? It's very hard for people to say no if you're coming at them with empathy, expressing confidence in their ability, and then offering to think it through with them, to be a thought partner rather than, would you like to hear what I have to say? Or would you like a list of 12 movies that I can tell you to watch?
Are you telling me to get rid of my list of 12 movies?
Nope, not at all. I'm saying you want to give them, when I only want to give advice or guidance when it's asked for, or when I've gotten permission to do it. So if someone says, hey, Victoria, do you have a movie that I could watch to help me think better about animal agriculture? You'll say, yes, I do. If you walk up to them and say, hey, I've got a movie that you should watch, you'll get a completely different reaction.
Oh, you're so wise. This is all making tremendous sense, Howard. So the book, everybody, is You Can Change Other People. And you can also find out more about my wise guest at plantyourself.com. He's on Facebook at Plant Yourself and on Instagram at Ask Howie. And I'm going to follow you on Instagram right now because I would love to ask you stuff like I've been doing for the past 20 minutes. So how about when it comes to changing ourselves? I love your 3-step formula, the empathy, the expressing confidence, and the offering to be a partner. That's brilliant when working with somebody else. But what about if the person we want to change is number 1?
Beautiful question. And it's funny because both my co-author and I decided independently that we were going to use the process that we teach in the book on ourselves. Like we were just going to do it. And we had this sort of awkward conversation where we both sort of admitted that it didn't really work. And what we came to is a realization that like, if you really want to change, get help. Like we need each other. Human beings, we think like, oh, I'm going to do this. And there's all these books, hundreds of wonderful books on how to change your own habits. And the truth is we live in community. We live with other people, and they are, our greatest source of annoyance sometimes. And they're also our greatest source of strength. Say like, find people who want to support you. I've given my book to someone and said, this is my owner's manual. If there are things I'm doing that you want to change, this is how I'd like you to do it. So let's remember that we're in this together, and, be part of communities of support rather than thinking that we're all individual atoms who have to, bootstrap ourselves to perfection.
I love that. I love the way that we can lift ourselves up and we can lift up others as well. So one thing we can do is read fabulous books by Howard Jacobson, and all of the books you've co-authored have been so helpful in my life. So we will put all of those on the show notes at mainstreetvegan.net. Thank you, Dr. Howard Jacobson.